Thank you for joining us today for Apex for Admins, getting started with Apex in 30 minutes. My name is LeeAnne Templeman, and I'm joined here by David Liu.
Hey guys.
We're really excited everyone could join today. Before we get started, those of you who have ever joined any Salesforce event or webinar are probably very familiar with this slide. This is our safe harbor statement, and what it's saying is please don't make any decisions about purchasing or future purchasing decisions with Salesforce based on any forward-looking statements, so based on any potential future releases or future functionality. So as I said, my name is LeeAnne Templeman. I'm a developer evangelist here at Salesforce. I've been at Salesforce about 5 years, and actually before I joined Salesforce, I was a Salesforce admin myself at Kaiser Permanente. So I come from an admin background, and I actually am learning to code as well. So I'm really excited to be here with David and talk about his learn to code path. David, would you like to introduce yourself?
Everyone, it's nice to talk to you finally. I'm David. One thing I want to say about LeeAnne is don't be fooled by her friendly exterior. She is a fierce admin. She really knows her stuff. So I got nothing but respect for her. And thanks, LeeAnne.
Thanks, David. So David's a technical architect at Google and a Salesforce MVP and the creator of sfdc99.com. We'll talk about all of those things today, but we're really excited to have him here, and I'm sure you are too. So before we get started, really make sure you connect with the community. So those of you who are joining on the recording, it doesn't mean you can't engage about this webinar or ask questions of myself and David. So follow us on Twitter, ask the questions for the hashtag #ApexForAdmins. We're going to make sure to follow that after this webinar is posted as well. Connect with Salesforce developers on Facebook or the Success community. So we're going to spend quite a bit of time today talking about, where you can find help, where you can find people who are also learning in the community. But definitely connect with us on the community. And like I said, this webinar is being recorded. So if you do have to drop off, or if you're joining later, again, #ApexForAdmins, and we're going to be answering any questions that come up later as well.
Yep. And guys, I check the community every day. I respond to everything, usually within 24 hours, so definitely stay in touch.
How many posts did you say you had on the community?
I have 4,000. 4,000.
So that's really backing up the statement there. David will definitely respond to in the community. And on the subject of questions, don't wait until the end. We have a great team here in the room with us and remote that's answering questions, experts, both Apex questions or questions about learning the code, but also if there's questions you'd like us to address on the webinar, if you have questions for David or myself. Definitely, you can only ask your question once. We're all going to see it. We're going to make sure that we're filtering up those questions so they get asked and they get resolved. And also if there's questions that don't get resolved on the Q&A at the end, again, we're going to talk about the developer forums quite a bit, but visit developer.salesforce.com/forums, and that's a great place to get coding questions answered, Apex questions answered. So what are we doing here today? So first we're going to talk about kind of who we are and where we came from, and we're going to talk about David's path, and I'm sure that the audience really wants to hear about that. I know I love hearing about David's path. And we're going to talk about Apex. So what is Apex and when would we be using it? Now, as far as who should be tuning in, definitely if you're on this webinar, we want to keep you here. Please stay for the whole webinar. It'll be really fun. We're going to have a good time talking about David's path and talking about programming in Salesforce. But if you have a background as an admin and no programming experience, this webinar is really targeted for you. So if you have some expertise in Salesforce with using the declarative platform, but you haven't written a line of code ever, we're really excited to have you because this is for you. So let's talk a little bit about David's path. David has a really interesting background. He came from he has a background in marketing, and now he has a Force.com dream job at Google as a technical architect. So I'm really excited to kind of learn more about David's path and where he came from. So David, why don't you tell us a little bit about your role today at Google?
Sure. So I'm a technical architect at Google, and I'm actually the only full-time Salesforce developer in our huge org. And basically this means that I'm trusted to solve all of our toughest technical problems in Salesforce. One thing I want all the listeners to know is that being a technical architect or even being a Salesforce developer, it's not about being a coder or being a non-coder. Right? It's about mastering the Salesforce platform. It's about being a Salesforce Jedi, just being able to do absolutely anything you want to do on the platform, whether it involves code or not. So for all the listeners, who are admins looking to learn how to code, I just want to say, really, really embrace your admin side. The best solution to tough problems aren't always complex. They don't always involve code. And often even at Google, even our toughest technical problems, they do involve significant admin work as well.
Awesome. So you're a developer today. You have this really interesting background, and you're doing both hardcore developer and awesome admin work at Google in your role. But when did you actually learn to code? When did you pick up that programming skill set to bring to your Salesforce portfolio?
So I started learning to code in 2010. I graduated from college in 2009. I had a marketing degree. I was a professional email spammer, and I didn't know how to write a single line of code. But just from dabbling, from work, I found I really enjoyed it. So about a year after graduating, I went fully down the code path and really immersed myself in code.
And you taught yourself. You're a completely self-taught programmer.
That's right. And back in the day, back in 2010, I guess, there weren't many resources out there for learning. It was a lot tougher than it is now. You guys are spoiled now. There's tons of resources out there for you guys to learn.
And how did you find that learning path? Like, what was it like as you were kind of starting to learn the code and trying to teach yourself without maybe the community as it is today? Like, it wasn't really like that in 2010. So how was that for you?
Yeah. The hardest part about learning, or the hardest part about becoming a programmer is getting started. Just those first few steps. And the reason why it's hard is you're gonna have so many doubts. I remember always wondering, like, is it too late for me to start? Should I have majored in computer science? Am I too old, or am I not smart enough? But none of that's true. And I know you guys, when you guys are learning, I guarantee you guys are going to have these doubts too. And when you guys have those doubts, I want you to think of this moment right here. I want you to remember what I'm going to say next. And what I want to say is that anyone can do it. Seriously, guys, I really mean it. Anyone can learn how to code. It doesn't matter what background you come from. I've met developers far, far better than I who come from all sorts of backgrounds. I met a female developer who started learning how to code in her 40s, and she is much better than I am. And that's a shout out to the girly geeks out there. I know you guys are listening. Doesn't matter if you're a man or woman, you can learn how to code.
And so you felt like you kind of got through, you got through that. I know in your blog and in an interview we did previously, you talked about kind of 2 months, like after kind of banging your head against the wall for a couple months, and then getting stuck. You had a great story about getting stuck for 8 hours on single quotes versus double quotes.
That's right. First time I wrote code, I got stuck literally for 8 hours. I had no idea why my code didn't work. It was because I was using double quotes instead of single quotes, and we'll talk about that more later.
But there's a light at the end of the tunnel, right? Like you get through that, you persevere. So what would be your tips around, how do you get through that? Because it is difficult to start to learn the code. As someone who's learning to code myself, it's hard, and there are a lot of obstacles there, and it can be disheartening when you're just starting, especially if you don't have a computer science background or a programming background. So what are your tips to kind of get through that and get to the light at the end of the tunnel?
Yep. Looking back at learning, I see now that it is actually so much easier to learn and get started than I thought when I was starting. I was so intimidated when I started, but now looking back, it's actually there is a step-by-step process for doing that. And here are my top tips. You guys, if you follow these tips, I guarantee you will become a developer in 6 months or less. First one, you gotta attend our webinars. We are doing 3 webinars on this. Putting a lot of love into these webinars, and we're giving away all the secrets. So I hope to see you guys there. Second one, on my website, sfdc99.com, there are tutorials and quizzes there for you to literally get a job as a Salesforce developer. And my fiance, she really hates my site because I spend so much time on it. I put all my love into it. So definitely check it out. I want to encourage everyone to be active on the community. It really helped me learning just being around people, whether it's on the forums, whether it's around the developer user groups, your local one, or in Dreamforce, you're going to meet people who have the same background as you, who are learning to code. I see tons of them everywhere, and you're really going to be inspired by them. Now, there's a book. It's called Head First Java. This book changed my life. I would not be sitting here today if I did not read that book. It's $25 on Amazon. It is going to teach you the Java programming language, which is very similar to Apex. It's 90% overlap. You have to get that book. It's a really fun read, too. There are tons of pictures. It's really a big inspiration for my site. One thing I also want to say is, whether or not you become successful in becoming a dev, that has nothing to do with how smart you are or how talented you are. And it has everything to do with your perseverance. So, I really encourage you guys to have that attitude to learn, be consistent, and never give up, and find ways to make coding fun. That's the most important. If you're reading a book, or you're reading a site, a blog, maybe my site, and you're getting bored, and it's making you resent coding, then let it go. Stop reading it. Find other avenues. You got to reward yourself. You gotta set goals, right? So for me, I had a goal. I wanted to get a certification, and after I got that certification, I bought myself a nice hoodie. Maybe one good goal for you guys is to attend all 3 webinars and copy and paste all the code in your own org and test it out. That's a great goal, and maybe you guys can treat yourselves to a nice T-shirt afterwards. I like to wear sunglasses when I code to help make coding fun, and I drink Mike's Hard Lemonade, apple cider when I code. I'm not proud of it, but I really enjoy it. Don't drink more than 1 or 2. It's gonna hurt you.
So that's awesome. Those are great tips. I just have a mental image of you sitting at your computer with Mike's Hard Lemonade and sunglasses and a new hoodie.
It's good times.
Sounds like fun. So one of the things that I think is so awesome and it's really exciting is you had this path and you had to teach yourself to code. You had to find the resources. You had to kind of figure out what made the most sense for someone with no programming background whatsoever to learn Apex. And you didn't stop there, right? You didn't stop when you got your dream job at Google. You didn't stop when you kind of were an established Salesforce developer. You've gone back to our community of beginning Salesforce developers and created this amazing website. This is actually where I'm learning to code. So I work at Salesforce and I'm going through David's beginner tutorials to learn Apex myself. And I love it. I find it really accessible. It's really easy if you have no programming background. And it's cool, and your blogs are really fun. I love the blog posts that you do. So tell us a little bit kind of about your site and what people can expect from your site and who should go to it.
Yeah. Looking back, I could have learned how to code in half the time if just all the resources were in one place for me to figure out, just give me a step-by-step process to becoming a developer. And I didn't, after going through that process, I didn't want anyone else to have to go through all the frustration that I went through. So I built this site. Really, it has, everything you'd ever need to know about becoming a dev on it, from absolute zero background. And I give away all my secrets. I don't hold anything back. Anything you need to know, I put it there. And all questions, all comments that I get, I answer them 100% completely honestly.
Awesome. Yeah, I've seen you're really responsive to your readers. So that's definitely another way. We mentioned tweeting us and using the hashtag Apex for Admins and going to the forums. But also, if you want to talk to David, he responds to pretty much everyone who talks to him on his site. So I'm probably going to overload your site now with a lot of questions on your site. But if you want to talk to David about learning to code, he's a wonderful teacher. So you have such a fun job at Google using your Salesforce admin and developer skills. So what advice can you give for finding your Salesforce dream job?
Awesome. You guys, you got to get certified. I interview tons of people at Google, Salesforce developers, and there's really no excuse not to have certifications. You can take them at home, you take them online, it's really quick. Anytime I see a resume and it's got 3 or 4 certifications, that person is guaranteed an interview. So get certified. Highly recommend it. Second one, you got to be social. This is sometimes outside the comfort zone of traditional developer types, but it's really helpful. Nowadays your resume it's not the 1 or 2 page document you send. Your resume right now is your social presence. So you have to make sure that you are very active online, because people will Google your name and learn more about you before you even walk in the door, just based on your online presence. And I actually got my first job as a Salesforce developer by being social. So 6 months after I started learning how to code, I went to a developer user group, and I met someone who was a recruiter, and there I got my first job as a Salesforce developer. And
yeah, I actually got my first job at Salesforce from LinkedIn. I got my certifications when I was an admin, and I updated my LinkedIn profile, and then there's a lot of searches out there for Salesforce administrators, Salesforce developers. There's a really big demand there. So if you are doing the work to get those certifications, do yourself a service and make sure that that's on all of your social profiles. It's on your blog, it's on your Twitter, it's on your LinkedIn, whatever social profiles you engage in. Make sure that you're updating that, because there's a lot of people out there searching for those talents.
Yep. And when you're going to these user group meetings, and networking with people, I know a lot of people are sometimes scared to network, but I just want to say, when you go to these meetings, like, people will come to you. Like, developers and admins are in such demand nowadays that you don't really need to go out of your comfort zone and talk to a bunch of people. You just have to make yourself open for the opportunity for people to talk to you. So go to your local dev group. It's going to be really great for your career. All right, quality over quantity, guys. This applies to anything when you are applying for a job. Your resume, you want your resume to be 1, 2 pages, really, really high quality stuff. And when you're applying to places, I really recommend choosing maybe 1 or 2 places and really, really focusing on getting a job there instead of shotgunning your resume everywhere. I remember one recent job offer I got. There was this one company I really, really wanted to work for, and I researched everything about it. There's a site called Glassdoor.com. You can literally know every interview question for any company. It's all there. I remember spending an entire week on LinkedIn just clicking on every profile of every employee at that company just so they'd know that I was interested in that company. That was really, really high quality search, and eventually I got a job offer there. So really recommend quality, guys. And you have to be persistent. I am not ashamed to say that I've been rejected by Google probably 10 times already. In fact, I've been rejected from Google for my current job, but I didn't take no for an answer. I stuck to my guns. I knew I was qualified, and I kept basically harassing the hiring manager, and eventually I got the job. And I know tons of stories like this too, guys. You got to be persistent. Thinking long term, guys. Don't like, so much changes in just like 2 or 3 years even. You shouldn't optimize for like the first job offer or the highest paying one. You got to think long term, and just really highly recommend that for you guys. And most importantly, you guys are the tigers, right? We are the hunters, and the jobs, those are the prey out there. The way the market is right now is there's such a big need for Salesforce developers that companies need you more badly than you need them nowadays. So remember, you guys are a great asset. Come in with those interviews with a lot of confidence.
And especially, those of you in the audience who are already, Salesforce admins and who already are, really experienced in the declarative platform, and you're adding to that skill set and becoming admins who code. I mean, that's a really well-rounded skill set to bring to a company. Mm-hmm. So that makes you really in demand. So, and also one of the things that David mentioned, or a few of the things David mentioned, being social and really immersing yourself in Salesforce and giving yourself the chance to both network and also just kind of be around the learning environment. A great place to do that, maybe the best place to do that, is Dreamforce. So Dreamforce is coming up in October, and it's incredibly exciting. I went to Dreamforce as a customer, and I learned so much when I was an admin. It was a really we have a discount code here on the screen and a bit.ly on the screen for all of our audience. So if you don't yet have registration for Dreamforce, and if you do want to go, I definitely suggest checking it out. Also on the Dreamforce site, there is some great, if you are kind of working to make the case to go to Dreamforce, there's some great materials there for kind of proving out the ROI to your manager to send you to Dreamforce. Because it is, I mean, if you're involved in the Salesforce ecosystem in any way, it's an invaluable experience. I mean, you come out of Dreamforce with notebooks full of ideas and stuff you want to build and stuff you want to learn.
So true.
It's really, really fun. It's a great place to really be social in action and make a name for yourself.
Yep. I'm gonna be speaking at Dreamforce too. So come to my session. Come meet me. I'd love to meet you guys in person. Have a beer or something.
Awesome. So let's talk about Apex, right? We've talked quite a bit about kind of who should be learning Apex. So Apex is the Salesforce programming language. As David has been mentioning, it's very popular. Having this as part of your skill set, especially for those of you who are an admin, it's a very popular skill to have, especially for those out in the ecosystem looking for Salesforce developers. And it's how you, as an admin, can take it beyond point and click. So those of you who are really familiar or getting familiar with the point and click or the declarative platform, Apex is how you can further extend what you can do in Salesforce. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So if we have any admins on the phone or anyone who's built out anything in Salesforce before, everything on the left here is probably going to look pretty familiar. It's very likely that you've manipulated the user interface using page layouts or record types, or at least manipulated the data model, maybe created some fields, created some custom objects, created different relationships. But what we're really focusing on today is where we can use Apex to extend kind of the business logic. So if you've built anything using workflow rules, validations, approval processes, that's all building in business automation into your Salesforce using that, what we call the declarative platform. So using that point and click functionality, using the approval engine, using the workflow builder. But if you've built a workflow rule before, you know that there's limits. Workflows are amazing. You can do a lot with them, but you can't, for example, create a new record with a workflow. Right? And so that's kind of where the limitations I know when I was an admin I would run up against. So I built out everything I could using workflows and approvals, and then I'd kind of have, the last 15% of my business automation I had to outsource to a developer and have someone else build it for me because I didn't know how to write a trigger. And so today what we're going to do is we're going to walk through writing a basic trigger so you can start to kind of extend your business automation yourself. And the good news is that every object, every field, all that work you've already done in Salesforce is already Apex enabled. So that means that you can start building triggers on custom objects that you've built. You can start building triggers that call on custom fields you've built. So all of that is already Apex enabled for you. So let's talk about really breaking down what a trigger looks like and what the different pieces mean in this language. And David has a great kind of color coding methodology that you'll see a lot on his website that helps explain what's important, how you should read it.
All right, code time. All right, before I tell you what this trigger does and what the coloring does, I want you to just take a moment and try to figure out on your own what it does. Try to absorb everything this trigger is doing and try to be one with this trigger. And we've color coded this trigger to make it easier for you guys to read, and I will cover those. So anything in purple, these are variables in our trigger. And variables are things that we can name, anything we want, whatever is easiest for you to remember. Anything in blue text, these are Salesforce special keywords. You're going to see these keywords often in triggers and in code in general in Salesforce, so it's good to make a note of them. Anything in orange, this is just free text, right? These aren't code statements, they're just free text strings.
And notice the single quotes.
Single quotes, there you go. Very important. Very, very important. And anything with a blue background, that also means it's important. Really focus on the things with blue backgrounds because anything with a white background, it's what we call boilerplate code. It's not important, and you're going to just copy and paste that code anytime you write stuff. Now, we are going to go through this trigger line by line, starting at the first one. And if you haven't figured it out already, what this trigger does is every time a new account is created, it creates a case on this account. So let's see how it does it. So first line, we are naming this trigger t-shirts. Again, that's a variable, so we can name it anything we want. This trigger runs on the account object, and it runs every time a new account is created. And we know that by writing the after insert inside the parentheses. Again, if that part is difficult to follow, don't worry about it, because you're going to copy and paste that code every time you write a new trigger. Now in the second line, we're doing a loop. Now there can be multiple accounts that enter this trigger. And trigger new, that's the list of all accounts that are entering this trigger. Now usually when you are using Salesforce creating a new account, you're only creating one at a time. But if you've used data loader before, you'll know that sometimes you're creating thousands of accounts at a time. So what we're doing in this line is we're looping through all of those thousands of accounts, and we're setting them to a variable called ACC. Now moving on to the blue background stuff. Guys, this is the important stuff. So the first blue background line, we are creating a new case, and we're assigning it to a variable called shirt case. If we wanted to create a new opportunity or a new lead, we'd simply replace case with lead. Now in the second and third line, we are setting fields on our case, and we're setting them using dot notation. All dot notation does is it lets you access the properties of a record. If you've written workflow rules or formulas, you should be familiar with using dot notation. Now on the fourth blue background line, we are setting a lookup field on the case. So every case by default has a standard field called account, and it's a lookup to the account record. Now the API name of this field is called account ID, and we're setting it to the ID of the account variable in our trigger. And finally, the fourth line, we are inserting this case. We are creating it. Without that line, insert shirt case, nothing gets saved. So that one's really important, guys.
Awesome. So this is really illuminating into kind of breaking down the different pieces. Do you want to switch over and we'll actually build out a trigger and try it out?
Let's do it, LeeAnne.
Awesome.
All right, so here is our Salesforce developer org, and let me show you where you can write your triggers. First, you go to Setup.
And actually, really quick, before we get started, for anyone joining on the phone, it's fine if you're not walking through this in your developer org. David has posted all of the code for this on his SFDC 99 blog, so it's all posted there. See, that's where when we say go through and copy and paste and try it out yourself. So if you're not in your developer org or anything right now, that's totally fine. Just follow through, watch David, and then go to sftc99.com and get that code and try it yourself.
Yep, good call. So I'm copying this trigger code right here, going back to our Salesforce org. We're going to go here on the left-hand side to customize. Our trigger is going to be on the account object, so we're going to accounts, and then triggers. I'm going to hit new trigger, and you'll see all the boilerplate code I mentioned earlier is already here. Because again, you just copy and paste that in every trigger. And here's our code. We're going to save. And there are no errors. Great. So now let's actually see if our code works. So the way to see it is we're going to create a new account. Let's call it Google. So when I save this, I expect a new case to be created. Bam, right here. Here's our case. Let's take a look at it. So we see that the account lookup field is populated like we did in our trigger. The priority is here, and so is the subject. So our trigger works. Great.
That's awesome. So again, if you want to go through this and build this yourself, just go to the SFDC 99 site. Now let's go back and let's talk a little bit about more of what should we do when we write triggers, and what do we need to also make sure we take into consideration, and that's test classes. So David, do you want to talk about when we use test classes?
Yeah. Whenever you need to deploy code in an org, So before we were just testing code in a developer environment, but we might want to deploy to an actual Salesforce production instance. And when we do that, Salesforce requires us to write a test class. And to be more specific, it requires us to write code that tests at least 75% of the lines of code in our trigger. And if we can pass that, then Salesforce will let us deploy to an actual org.
Great. So how is a test class, I think when we go into that example test class, it does look similar to a trigger in some ways. So how is a test class different than a trigger?
Yeah. So what you want to do on a test class, and you have to look at it from Salesforce's perspective. When you're coding in Salesforce, your code is all in the cloud. If you're coding on any other language, your code is saved on your computer and you run it on your computer. But since we're coding on the Salesforce platform, all of our code, gets run on Salesforce's servers, and Salesforce just wants to make sure that we don't break the cloud. So we have to write test classes. And so what we want to do in our test class is we want to indirectly call our trigger. It might sound confusing right now, but you're going to see in a minute what I'm talking about. We want to indirectly activate our trigger.
So why is this something that, for a beginning developer, someone who's starting to code, why is this important when we're thinking about how to deploy our code and where we can start to write triggers?
Yeah, anytime you're writing code, whether it's in Salesforce or any other programming language, you're always going to have to write test classes. And what they are is you're just automating all the manual testing that you would do normally.
Great. So let's go ahead and actually take a look at the test class and see what it looks like.
Sweet. So when we wrote our trigger and we wanted to test if our trigger worked, what we did in Salesforce was, we created a new account and we checked to see if a new case was created. Now, all we want to do is we want to do that exact same thing, but in our test class. Now, take a look at this test class, and you'll notice that nothing in this test class explicitly refers to our trigger. It doesn't say, run the T-shirt trigger. All this test class does is it does an action that will, trigger our trigger, and that is to create a new account. Because every time a new account is created, a new case is created. So if you look at the white background lines starting at the top, that's all boilerplate code. Don't worry about it at all. You're going to copy and paste that every time you write a test class. And the blue background, this is the important stuff again. And this code should actually look pretty familiar to you. All we're doing is we're creating a new account record. We're setting the name field because that's a required field, and then we are saving it to the database.
Awesome. So let's go through and same exercise. Let's go through and actually write a test class. So just like with the trigger code, this code is available on sfdc99.com. So when you go through the steps to actually write your own trigger and write your own test class, it's all available there.
All right, back to Salesforce. You go to Setup. This time we're going to develop Apex classes, new. We're going to paste it here. Now, the difference between test classes and triggers is that triggers are run anytime an action happens in Salesforce. For example, a new account being created or updated. But test classes are only run when you deploy code or when you explicitly run them, like we're going to do here. We're hitting run test. So what Salesforce is doing is it's running our test class. It's finding all the triggers that are run as a result of our test class, and we see it just passed because we got that green checkbox. And then it's going to calculate how many lines of code that we covered as a result of this test class. And when we go back to our T-shirt trigger, we can go look at this code coverage line, and we see that 100% of the lines of code in this trigger were run as a result of our test class. So now we've written our first code, we've written our first test class, and we can actually deploy this to an org now. Good job, guys.
Awesome. So that was really fun walking through, and I went through those exercises, starting to write your first trigger. And I definitely suggest when you go through and you're copying and pasting, take a moment, and even if you paste it like line by line and you kind of take a look at what each line does, And that color coding that David has on the beginner tutorial is really helpful as well to start to break down what the different pieces do within those triggers. So we talked about some of the great places to get started and kind of what David's experienced before getting started. And I know, David, you really emphatically believe, and I think it's great, it's very encouraging for me, that anyone can learn to code. And if you go through the right steps, anyone can start to code in Salesforce. Apex is the programming language that we use in Salesforce. So those of you who are building on the declarative platform and the workflow wizards out there, Apex is what you can use to even do more in your Salesforce org. Where do we write Apex? So we saw that David navigated to the setup area and under develop and test classes or Apex classes. Yep. And under each object for our standard objects, we also have the trigger list available there. And when do we use Apex? So like I mentioned, those workflow wizards out there, I know you guys know when you can't use workflow, right? There's times where you want to use workflow and it doesn't do the job. So that's a great place to start with writing triggers. Wanting to create a new record, create a new opportunity, things like that. It's a wonderful place to start with using triggers and using Apex. So what can you do next to get started? David mentioned the Developer Edition org, so that's what David was writing in today. You can get at developer.salesforce.com, you can get a free Developer Edition org. So if you haven't gotten one before, I highly suggest going and signing up for one because they never expire. And they're a great place to start to learn to code. You can have as many as you want. You can't break it. So get one of those, start going through the exercises. Now, when you get to a place where you feel like you've written a trigger that you'd like to maybe deploy in your production, if you are an admin and if you do have access to Sandbox, Sandbox is a great place to either write triggers to practice with based on the existing metadata you have in your Salesforce, or to write triggers that you intend to deploy to production. And the great thing about using Sandbox is we actually have a feature called change sets, and that will allow you to deploy your code from Sandbox to production if you do have access to Sandboxes.
They're really easy to use.
Yeah, change sets are great. Now, why should you get that Developer Edition org that we mentioned instead of a trials? For those of you who are familiar with trials, trials expire, and not all trials have Apex enabled. Some trials are Professional Edition. So definitely all the work that we're doing here, the Developer Edition orgs are a great place to do that. They're really the best place to start. So like we mentioned, the developer.salesforce.com/forums is a really good place as you're starting to learn to code, as you're getting deeper into writing triggers, deeper into Apex. There's a lot of really smart programming rock stars that hang out in developer forums and post kind of things that they've learned and answer questions. So if you can't find the answer on Google, if you can't find the answer in the materials that you've reviewed already, go to the developer forums. I know David said they were a great help to him when he was starting to code as well. SFDC99.com, so we've talked about it quite a bit, but it's a wonderful site, and like I said, that's where I'm learning to code. I'm going through all of David's beginner tutorials, and David responds, and it's a great place to go to walk through the tutorials and learn to code. And I also find your blogs very inspirational when you talk about your own learning path. It makes me feel better about mine.
Thank you.
And join the community. So for those of you, especially those of you joining on the recording, it's not too late to ask questions. So hashtag Apex for admins. Tweet us, talk to us on the Success community. Hashtag AskForce is also a really good Twitter hashtag for asking questions of the Salesforce community. We have phenomenal MVPs and Salesforce employees who kind of keep track of that hashtag, so there's some really good questions answered that way. But again, if you have any feedback about the webinar, if you have any questions for David or myself, we would love to talk to you on Twitter, hashtag Apex for admins. And join us next time. So one of David's #1 top tip for success was to join all 3 webinars. So we're going to be back next week. So we're going to talk about SOCL, writing cross-object queries, getting deeper into triggers, writing more interesting, more complex types of triggers, and writing loop and if statements. So definitely sign up. Join us next week at same time, same place, May 22nd, 10 a.m. Pacific time. And again, that one will be recorded as well. So now we'll switch over and see if there's any questions that have come up. And again, thank you everyone so much for joining. We had a really good time, and we hope this was meaningful for you. So let's go see if there's any great questions that we should.
Cool. first question, there was a question on the code. And going back to our trigger, the question was, what is the ACC variable in this trigger? So let's go through this. So to understand what the ACC variable is, you have to know that this is a loop here. Everything starting from the 4 and everything blue and the line after it, that is everything inside our loop. And we are looping through all the records in this trigger, all the accounts that are being created in this trigger. And usually there's only one record in a trigger, but when you do things, for example, with data loader, sometimes you're going to be inserting many accounts at the same time. So trigger.new, that is a list of accounts that are entering our trigger. And what this line is saying is for every account in this trigger, do all the lines of code inside the brackets. And so for every account, we are naming it ACC. So that's a temporary variable that we're creating in this trigger. And then using that temporary variable, we create a bunch, or actually we create one case per account. So hopefully that answers your question.
So I had a question about when people should be writing triggers versus test classes. The question was, do they have to write the trigger first and then write the test class?
Yep. You know, honestly, most people write the trigger first, but you know, you can also write the test class first. And a lot of people say that it's better to write the test class first. But me, preferably, I like writing the trigger first because the trigger is more fun. The trigger is where, you know, all the important logic happens, and the test class is, you know, you just making sure that that logic is run correctly.
So we did have one question about using a developer edition org, which we mentioned a few times as a great place to learn to code. So someone asked, you know, I have a developer edition org, but I have a bunch of stuff in it. How do I clean it up? Just go sign up for a new one. There's no limit to the number of developer edition orgs you can have, and it's a great way to just kind of start fresh with a new org, especially for your learning path.
Yep, I have like 30 of those orgs.
So we actually had an interesting question around the difference between a Salesforce developer and a Salesforce architect. So a Salesforce architect typically designs, and a Salesforce builder typically builds, but those are definitely not mutual. Those are skills that often go very well hand in hand, but that's as far as the naming goes. And we've gotten a lot of questions about the Salesforce architect title specifically because there was a Business Insider article that was released recently that listed Salesforce Architect as the #1 most desirable tech skill. So that's very exciting, both for our entire Salesforce community and for us at Salesforce. But having a Salesforce developer skill is very, very valuable. And I would say, you know, in my own experience, people who know how to write Apex and can write triggers and can start to program on Apex, who also have a good understanding of the declarative platform, are extremely valuable. So those of you admins out there who are starting to learn to code, you're just making yourself very, very valuable employees, very, very valuable contributors to any Salesforce org, because knowing, you know, exactly what you can do in the declarative platform and being able to write triggers when you need to and being able to write Apex when you need to in Visualforce is super powerful.
Yeah, your admin background is so important. I can't stress how important it is. It's probably your biggest advantage as you learn how to code and, you know, eventually become a Salesforce developer or Salesforce architect. Honestly, though, those things, Sales developer and architect, those are just titles. You know, it's not that important. I think what's important is, you know, thinking long term, just understanding the platform so well that you can do, you know, anything on it. And, you know, the title is just a reflection of your understanding of the platform. And architect is something I would say means, you know everything about Salesforce.
So I do have a question about what we're seeing on the screen right here, and that is, so after insert, it's a Salesforce keyword that means upon creation. Do you want to kind of talk about what after insert means and why we have that?
Yep. So there are different keywords that we can enter inside these parentheses. We can do after insert, or we could have done after update, for example, or even after delete. Without going into too much detail on that, actually we can even combine them both. We can say after an account is inserted and after an account is updated. In this case, we only wanted the trigger to run once, so we did it after insert. If we did after update, for example, then a new case would have been created, anytime someone made any edits to the account, and then we just have a ton of cases.
So I have a question about what do you use, David, to code? The developer console, Eclipse. There are a lot of options for IDEs today. So what do you like to use yourself?
Yeah, I personally use the Eclipse IDE, but I also often use the Salesforce webpage for smaller triggers, and even I use the dev console often for debugging. When you're getting started, I wouldn't worry too much about these things. What's important is that you want to remove all barriers to starting. You want to make it as easy to start coding as possible, and sometimes setting these IDEs and stuff up, can be difficult. And the UI is plenty good enough for you to get started. So for complete newbies, I highly recommend doing your coding just from Salesforce.com.
Awesome. So we got a question: should you use triggers for required fields? So I think this is a great example around when having that admin skill set and kind of being familiar with the validation rules is a great time to. You're a big proponent, David, of using clicks whenever you can, and then using code. So should you use triggers for required fields?
Yeah, I think if you do that, that's over engineering. Validation rules get the job done. Anytime you're in a spot where you can either code something or do it with clicks, you always want to do it with clicks. And I would even go so far as to say that, anytime someone maybe asks you to code something, you should first check if you can do it, without code. If you can do it using just formula fields or roll-up summaries or validation rules first, because there's really no reason to do more work than you need to. And the declarative stuff scales really well as your org grows.
Awesome. So we got great question. So should we be inserting outside of the for loop?
Good question. Very good question. So this is a little bit more of an advanced topic. So what we wrote here is a trigger, and the trigger works in most scenarios. But there are some scenarios where this trigger will break. For example, if too many accounts are inserted at once, then this trigger will likely not work. Simply because Salesforce has something called governor limits, and governor limits prevent you from doing too much in your code at once. And without getting too deep into the subject, just know that this trigger works, and it works in most scenarios, but there are edge cases where it won't work. And as you start coding more and learning more, you're gonna learn more about governor limits and how to get around them.
Awesome. We got a comment, not a question. Someone said, "David, you're the man."
I love you too.
That's awesome. So let's go through this is a great question, actually. Just it comes up a couple times. And what is the difference between a workflow and a trigger? So I think a workflow rule is something that you can do in Salesforce. It's if you go into Salesforce and do the setup area and you search workflow, that'll take you to a wizard that allows you to build rules in Salesforce and to determine the actions that should happen when those rules are true. So you can say, if this date range or if this date is more than 5 days, then I'd want to send an email, right? That's a very basic example of a workflow rule. Workflows are a great way using point and click in Salesforce to enforce business automation. Things like email reminders, maybe field updates on that record. That can all be accomplished with workflow rules. So they're really powerful, and I very much suggest anyone who's working in a Salesforce environment should make themselves familiar with that, because it's a good way to accomplish a lot of the business automation needs that you'll have in Salesforce. Now, triggers are, we're looking at a trigger on the screen right now. Triggers are a programmatic expression of business automation in Salesforce, at least for this example. So a trigger is a way to enforce that type of business automation, but it gives you a lot more flexibility. You have a lot more options, but it does require code. So that's really the core difference. So often, I'll work with customers who maybe can accomplish 85% of their business automation, 90% of their business automation, with workflow rules, things like case management or account management or making sure all the leads get flagged early on, things like that. But then there's usually that last 10 to 15% that workflow rules aren't quite enough for. They need more flexibility, they need more power, they need the ability to create new records, maybe create multiple records, update fields on other records. So that's when we would start to use triggers. So that's a great question.
Yeah. One thing I want to add to that is think of a trigger as basically a workflow that has no limits. Imagine a workflow that can do anything in your imagination. That's what a trigger is. And a classic example is, a workflow can't create new records. Not yet, at least. It's coming soon. But another example is that when you're doing a workflow, you can't edit records that are not in the workflow. You can't edit like completely unrelated records. But using triggers, you can do that. You can edit any or create any record you want in your database.
Mm-hmm.
And in webinars, in our second and third webinars, we're going to talk about how you do that using a tool called Stockwell.
Mm-hmm. So here's a great question. What are some great starter projects to test out our introductory Apex skills?
Very good question. I get this one often. I recommend going to my site, sfdc99.com. I have quizzes. I have a lot of quizzes there, one for every chapter. And there I give you a sample trigger or a sample trigger for you to write, and you can see what the correct way to write it is and compare it to how you write it. Highly recommend that.
So I have a question about one of your recommendations. One of your tips was to read Headfirst Java, and I know you talked about that in our interview as well, and you're a big proponent of Headfirst Java as a really great place to kind of get your feet wet. Someone asked, is that going to be useful for me if I don't have a programming background?
Oh yeah. I read that without knowing anything, and that book is actually written for people who know nothing. So you're going to be totally fine getting that book.
Great.
And by the way, I don't make money on your purchases of this book, just to be totally clear.
You're not officially endorsing it. Yes.
Yep.
Got it. So let's see. Oh, we had a question. Someone, just to make sure we're really clear about where you find the code, one of the questions was, I can't find the code. So again, we're on the website, sfdc99.com. And it's going to be the first, I believe, right? If you just go to sfdc99.com,
Yep.
It should be.
Scroll down 2 posts. Bam.
Perfect. So it'll be under the main website. If you just scroll down a little bit to webinar code examples, get started with Apex. That beginner tutorial tab on the left side, that'll take you through his existing curriculum, which is a great place to go kind of walk through quizzes and things like that.
Here's one. LeeAnne is pretty cool.
Oh, thank you.
Totally agree with that.
It's not all caps like yours was, though. So I think we're about running into time. We're really excited that everyone joined today, and we hope that this was useful. Definitely follow us on Twitter, follow us on the Success Community, ask questions, whether that's in Success or emailing us, any way you can. If you have questions, we're here to help. We're really excited to have you on board, and we want to see you all next week as well. So don't forget, register for the May 22nd webinar. Even if you can't join in person, they're all going to be recorded, so just register to make sure you get that recording. And we're going to be delving deeper into triggers. So a lot of the questions that came up are kind of a little bit more advanced, like how do we kind of go further with triggers? And we hear you loud and clear, and we're excited to do that next week. So thank you so much for being here, David. It's a blast. I appreciate the learning that you've put together for my own learning path, and I'm so excited to have you here to talk to our audience and talk to our community. So looking forward to next week.
It's really fun. Talk to you guys next week.
Bye, everyone.